Disclosure: I am a big fan of Yahtzee Croshaw and his work such as Zero Punctuation, Let's Drown Out, and his other previously released games. If you feel as though this gives me a bias, you would be right. I will attempt to make this review as objective as possible. Now, for the review. The Consuming Shadow is a Lovecraftian-inspired horror survival roguelike developed by Ben Yahtzee Croshaw. The story of the game is one of a scholar that has been hired by an organization that hunts down the supernatural and is known as the Ministry of Occultism, or MOO for short. You play as the scholar and have been tasked with saving the world from an invading god that will destroy the world in 60 hours. To do this, you must use the banishment ritual of the god that is invading at Stonehenge. The only problem is that there are 5 gods, and you don't know which one is invading or what the banishment ritual is. So, with this mission at hand, you travel through Great Britain, clearing dungeons, gathering clues, and using deductive reasoning to find out which god is invading and what the banishment ritual is to save the world. Sounds simple, right? But don't forget that this game is a roguelike, so expect to die, and die again in pursuit of this banishment ritual. Another thing ubiquitous with roguelikes is procedural generation, and the Consuming Shadow is no exception. Each time you play, the god, the banishment ritual, the town names, the missions, and the dungeons will be procedurally generated, making sure that each playthrough is different each time. So let's say you've figured out the invading god and the full banishment ritual, but happen to die on the way to Stonehenge. Have fun doing it all over again. Fortunately, to make subsequent runs of the game easier, there is a leveling system that is one of the most interesting level systems I've ever encountered. Each time you level up in the game, you are given a burst star. These stars are used to boost your stats for the next run. This may seem standard, but it's how they're applied that makes it such an intriguing mechanic. When you start a run and you have some burst stars, this screen will pull up. This is your upgrade screen. You place burst stars on constellations. Each constellation boosts different stats. Continuing with the procedural generation aspect, each time you load it up, the constellations are in different locations, but this makes upgrading very inconsistent. One run you can have 3 overlapping constellations and have a super buffed character, and other times the constellations may not overlap at all. These stats can greatly affect how each run will go. They can boost health, car speed, ammo capacity, and one of the most vital stats, sanity. One of the major themes of Lovecraftian horror is that the more people know, the more insane someone will become, due to the fact that the human mind can't comprehend what's happening. This is represented perfectly by the game's sanity meter. Other games have sanity mechanics, but for the most part they just end up being how blurry the screen will get. But in the Consuming Shadow, sanity actually makes a huge difference. Each time you receive damage, you'll also lose sanity. You can also lose sanity through random encounters. Losing sanity causes all sorts of effects to happen to the player. Doors will move, illusions will appear, text will change, and even the menus will become dangerous. Lower sanity means these effects will happen more often. The gameplay of the game is a weird mixture of menus, resource management, and combat. The majority of the game spent per run is going to be spent in menus. This isn't a bad thing though. The menus are nicely designed and keep the atmosphere that the game has built. A lot of the game is based around resource management and decision making, such as, do I have enough time to stop in another town? Or should I buy that item that will help me, or save that money for a later use? Speaking of the time, that 60-hour time limit is dreadful, in a good sense. It gives urgency to the entire game. You may think 60 hours is a lot, but it soon runs down. The 60 hours is not 60 real hours, it's 60 in-game hours. Depending on what you're doing in the game, the 60 hours changes. If you're driving, the hours go by extremely quickly, but if you're in a dungeon, it does go by real time. Driving down the road and hearing the timer count down is just an awful feeling. You will start to question decisions on everything due to the time. asking if you even have the time to get the full banishment spell, or if you just need to head to Stonehenge and just guess for the spell. Which I actually did have to end up doing in one playthrough, and let's just say it did not end well. Getting the spell is also a great challenge. To get the spell, you have to clear dungeons to get clues and parts of the spell. The clues give hints that are put into a notebook. The notebook also has a chart that you fill out throughout the run to figure out which god is invading and what rune identifies that god. Some clues will be helpful, but other clues are just trash. Now, all the aspects of the game that I've discussed so far are great and satisfying, but there's two things that hold this game back. There's the art and the combat. The art is pretty self-explanatory. The Consuming Shadow is just not a very pretty game. To quote Yahtzee, in an Ego review special on the Consuming Shadow, he says, and I quote, "I am shit at art." And once you're used to the art, you can get past it in your brain. So you can get past the art, but unfortunately you can't get past the combat. Some enemies you can dodge their attacks, and bullets are usually good for taking them out at range. But if there are more than 2 enemies in a room, then prepare to die. When you get hit in the game, you go into a little stun animation. And when there's 3 enemies in the room, you're constantly getting mauled and put into that animation, barely getting a few hits off before another stun. Even with a full clip of hollow point bullets, which do 3 times the damage, you'll still either die or take a huge amount of damage before killing the enemies in the room. And it doesn't even matter if you have upgraded health and sanity, you're still going to take a lot of hits. This is a huge issue, especially when one of the quests for dungeons is to clear out rooms that have more than 3 enemies and a nest that constantly spawns more enemies. It's just overkill. Plus, there are also a few enemy types that I haven't managed to kill yet without taking some damage. The thing about combat and roguelikes is that they should embody player skill and not be completely RNG dependent. A good example is The Binding of Isaac. You don't have to get a single upgrade in that game and can beat the game entirely on skill. In The Consuming Shadow, the combat isn't skill-based. The combat isn't awful though, and it does fit the Lovecraftian theme of being powerless in the face of gods. So if that's what Yahtzee was going for, then good on him. Overall, The Consuming Shadow is a great game that is held back by some mediocre combat. The atmosphere, tension, music, and sense of accomplishment from beating the game is absolutely fantastic. It's not fun in the classic sense, but in the long haul, it's entertaining as hell. Just a few things to mention after the fact. There are actually 4 playable characters in the game. Each of these 4 characters change how the game is played. I won't be spoiling them because I feel as though you should discover them yourself. Also, there is a spell system in the game, but I never found myself using it. Just thought I should mention it. In the description below, there will be a link to where you can buy the game at theconsumingshadow.com. Oh, and one more thing. Running in this game really reminds me of Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? We got some work to do now. Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you?